Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're taking a deep dive into a topic you requested, Waardenburg syndrome. Getting into this was really intriguing, kind of like untangling a medical mystery. We're going to explore how genes can influence not only our physical appearance, but even how we hear. And to kick things off, we're going to start with a case report that really highlights the human side of the syndrome. It talks about an individual with Waardenburg syndrome type 3 who also has autism and an intellectual disability. Now, before we get ahead of ourselves, I want to emphasize that this is just one person's experience, but it does raise some interesting questions about just how diverse Waardenburg syndrome can be. And to help us unpack all of this, I've got our expert here. What are your thoughts on this case report, and what do we need to keep in mind as we explore this complex syndrome?
Well, it really shows us that Waardenburg syndrome isn't one size fits all, right? It's not just about the pigmentation changes that some individuals experience, although we will definitely get into all of that.
Yeah.
This case really underscores that each person with Waardenburg syndrome is unique. They have their own strengths, their own challenges and experiences. And I think that's important to remember as we go through this deep dive.
Yeah, I love that perspective. It's easy to get lost in the science, but the human element is so crucial. So before we get into all the details, let's start with the basics. What exactly is Waardenburg syndrome?
In simple terms, Waardenburg syndrome is a rare genetic condition. It affects about 1 in every 40,000 people. And as we've seen in that case report, it's not just one single symptom. It's a whole bunch of them, kind of like a
A
cluster.
cluster of symptoms.
Yeah,
Okay. And some are more obvious than others, I imagine.
exactly.
Yeah.
A lot of people associate Waardenburg syndrome with those really noticeable differences in pigmentation, like having 2 different colored eyes or a streak of white hair. And while those are definitely a part of it, they only tell part of the story.
So there's more to it than meets the eye, huh? What else should we know about Waardenburg syndrome?
Well, we've talked about melanin and its role in pigmentation, right? But it's also super important for our inner ear, specifically for something called sound localization.
Sound localization. Okay, so that's like how our brain figures out where a sound is coming from, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like if you hear a car horn, you can tell if it's coming from your right or your left.
Right, right.
But with Waardenburg syndrome, that lack of melanin can actually disrupt that whole process.
Really?
Yeah, it can make it really tough to pinpoint where sounds are coming from.
Wow, I had no idea those two things were related.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It really is. It's like our bodies are these intricate networks and everything's connected.
Absolutely. And because Waardenburg syndrome is caused by gene variations, the effects can be quite different from person to person.
Okay, so let's talk about the genetics then. The article mentions 6 genes that are involved.
6 key genes, yes.
6? That sounds complicated.
A little bit, yeah. Each gene is kind of like an ingredient in a recipe, each with its own specific job. We've got PAX3, MITF, SOX10,
Oh boy.
EDN3, EDNRB, and SNAI2.
Okay, I'm definitely gonna have to write those down.
They all play a part in making sure melanin is produced and distributed throughout the body, including in those sensory cells in the inner ear that we were just talking about.
So if there's an issue with one of these genes, it impacts the whole process.
Exactly. And that's why there are different types of Waardenburg syndrome. The most common ones we see are type I and type 2. They often have overlapping characteristics like those pigmentation changes and some degree of hearing loss.
Okay.
But even within those types, there's a whole spectrum of severity. Someone might have mild hearing loss, while another person might experience more significant deafness.
So it really is different for everyone.
Absolutely. And then there are the less common types, like type 3, which we saw in that case report we talked about earlier. Type 3 usually involves more noticeable physical differences,
Right.
and it can sometimes be associated with other developmental challenges as well. And then there's type 4. That one's the rarest, and it often involves digestive issues.
Hold on. Digestive issues. I thought we were talking about eyes and ears here. How does that fit in?
Well, remember those melanin-producing cells we've been talking about?
Yeah.
They're not just found in our eyes and ears. They line our digestive tracts too.
Oh, wow.
And in type 4, the lack of those cells can actually lead to a condition called Hirschsprung's disease.
Hirschsprung's disease. That sounds serious.
It can be, yeah. It affects the large intestine and can cause blockages, which can lead to really bad constipation and other complications. But the good news is that with early diagnosis and treatment, people with Hirschsprung's disease can usually live pretty normal lives.
That's good to hear. So early intervention is key no matter what type of Waardenburg syndrome someone might have.
Definitely. When it's caught early, it means the right support and management strategies can be put in place, and that gives each person the best chance to thrive.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, haven't we? We've talked about what Waardenburg syndrome is, the different types, the causes, but I'm curious, what does this actually look like day to day for someone living with this condition? Let's dive into that in part three. So we've covered so much about Waardenburg syndrome, from the pigmentation to the hearing and even digestion. But knowing all of this, how do you actually support someone living with this condition?
Well, that's the real question, right? And the answer is, w- well, it's complicated, just like Waardenburg syndrome itself. It's about figuring out what each person needs, which could be anything from visual aids or hearing aids to more specialized therapies for those other conditions like Hirschsprung's disease.
It's about empowering them, really, to live their lives with the tools and the knowledge, right?
Yep. Exactly. Let's take hearing loss as an example. For some, it might be as simple as making sure they have a quiet learning environment.
Right.
But for others, it might involve things like sign language, assistive listening devices, or even cochlear implants,
Mm.
which are really incredible when you think about it.
Cochlear implants, they really are amazing. It's like they can give someone the gift of sound. I was reading about how they bypass the damaged parts of the inner ear and actually directly stimulate the auditory nerve.
It's incredible what technology can do these days, isn't it?
Hmm.
And it's not just about, restoring the ability to hear. It's about helping people connect and communicate.
That's right. And what about the unique pigmentation that we see in Waardenburg syndrome? What kind of impact does that have on someone's life, and how can we be supportive there?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. You see, some people might see those physical features as a part of who they are, something that makes them unique,
Right, right.
while others might feel self-conscious about it or feel pressure from society to look a certain way.
It's a good reminder that even though there's this biological basis for Waardenburg syndrome, it's also really personal and social.
Absolutely. And that's why support can't just be medical. It's
Yeah.
about encouraging people to accept themselves, to embrace diversity, and to create a world where everyone feels seen and appreciated for who they truly are.
So well said. I think this has been such an eye-opening conversation. Understanding Waardenburg syndrome isn't just about learning medical facts. It's about opening our minds and our hearts to different ways of being and supporting one another. Well, we've come to the end of our deep dive today. Is there anything else you'd like to leave our listeners with as they continue to learn about this fascinating topic?
Just remember that everyone with Waardenburg syndrome has their own story to tell, so let's make sure we listen with open hearts and open minds.
I love that listen with open hearts and open minds. What a powerful message to carry with us in all aspects of our lives. Thank you so much for your time and your insights today. It's been a pleasure. And to all of you listening, thank you for joining us on this incredible journey into the world of Waardenburg syndrome. We hope you learned something new and feel inspired to keep exploring the world around you. Until next time, stay curious